Good morning and welcome to the second part of chapter 11, which looks at persuasive speaking. I'm going to really just highlight some things that are important as you're working on your persuasive speech. So as you're reading the chapter, there are some things you're going to want to pay attention to, and I just want to highlight a few of those things now. So to begin with, when it talks about persuasive speaking, some important things to remember is that when we make arguments, those are formed by making claims that are supported by evidence, and the underlying thing that connects that claim to the evidence is what's called the warrant. So those are the three parts of an argument that is there. So for example, a claim that I might make is that students who are involved in after-school program are more likely to have a higher GPA. Evidence would be, evidence that would support that. If it's a study, a news article, whatever the evidence is. And then a warrant may be, because this evidence says this, it explains that they're more likely to develop critical thinking skills or whatever the argument is. Second is that good persuasive speech topics are current, so they're current to the situation that we're in. They are controversial, so there are arguments on either side of the issue, and they're important to the speaker and the society. The worst mistake that you can make is to choose a topic that you don't care about. You want to choose a topic, especially your persuasive speech, that you care about so that your passion and interest in that topic comes through. Third is that your persuasive speech is a proposition of policy, and you're going to follow the problem, solution, organization pattern. So make sure you spend some time reading about propositions of policy in the second part of chapter 11. The next thing I want to highlight real quickly are different types of reasoning, and then we're going to talk about some fallacies. So we basically use three types of reasoning to make sense of the world around us. The first is inductive reasoning, and that's where you use several examples that build a conclusion. So for example, if I said, Joe took physics and it was difficult, Sally took physics and it was difficult, Luke took physics and it was difficult, I probably am going to draw the conclusion that physics is difficult. So you use several examples to reach that conclusion. Deductive reasoning is the opposite of that. So you go from a general conclusion and try to apply it to a specific example. And a lot of times we rely on what are called syllogisms. So for example, if I were to say, all men are mortal, and then I said, Sarah is a person, then I would draw the conclusion that Sarah is mortal. So you take some sort of general principle and you apply it to a specific example. And then the last type of reasoning is causal reasoning, which is where we establish a cause and effect relationship that are there. The second thing I want to talk about here are fallacies, which are error in reasoning. And if you look in chapter 11, section 3, it goes through a ton of fallacies that exist. And there are some that we're familiar with, like the bandwagon fallacy. Just because everybody wants to do it or jump on the bandwagon doesn't mean that it's correct. There are ad hominem attacks where we attack the person instead of the idea. There are lots and lots of fallacies that are there. You do want to look at those because it's something that you want to avoid when you're making persuasive arguments, but you also just want to be aware of them so you can identify them when people or news outlets are making persuasive arguments to you. And then the last thing I want to talk about in chapter 11 are some persuasive strategies. And there are three components of what Aristotle and Plato say, we need in order for there to be a persuasive message. And that's ethos, pathos, and logos. And in your persuasive speech, you want to make sure that you include all of those. So ethos first is the credibility of the speaker. And we've talked about establishing your credibility and introduction by telling us your experience with the topic, your interest in the topic. There are other things that go into credibility of the speaker. So how dynamic the speaker is, how likable they are, all of those things can really matter. And so spend some time reading about ethos and think about how can you help increase your ethos in the persuasive speech. Pathos are emotional appeals, and so that can be playing on emotions such as anger, sadness, can also be playing on good emotions such as happiness or joy. And being able to evoke emotion is important. A lot of people, in order to act on something, they need to feel emotionally connected to it. And so that's why you want to tell stories and be able to really show when you're upset about an issue that's there. It's important that you don't rely solely on emotional appeals. You don't want to manipulate people in that way. You never want to use emotion as a replacement for evidence and reasoning, but you do want to use it to help get your audience connected and to help support the logos that you use. And then finally, logos is the use of evidence, reasoning, and logic. So that's where we see the support that we use. It's where your sources will come in. It's where some of the reasoning that we just talked about are. So one of the best takeaways I can tell you about persuasive strategies as it relates to your persuasive speech is that you want to spend some time and make sure that you have claims of ethos, pathos, and logos in your persuasive speech. If you have any questions about chapter 11, please let me know. Thanks.